Chapter 1. The Stranger Who Helped Everyone. Daniel Green lived in the coastal town of Seabrook, a quiet place tucked between rolling green hills and the restless ocean. The town was small, only a few streets of shops, a row of colorful houses by the harbor, and a lighthouse that stood like a watchful guardian on the cliff. Life here was simple. The smell of salt filled the air, and gulls cried overhead. People knew each other's names, and most had lived in Seabrook their whole lives. But Daniel was different. He hadn't been born here. He came from a large, noisy city far away. A place filled with tall buildings, traffic, and strangers who rarely spoke to one another. 5 years ago, he arrived in Seabrook carrying only a suitcase, a box of books, and an old oil lantern. Nobody knew exactly why he had left the city, and Daniel never offered the story. Daniel worked at the town's little library. It was not a grand building, just 2 floors and shelves of well-used books. The library smelled faintly of paper and sea air, because the windows were often left open to let in the breeze. Daniel's job was to help people find books, keep the place tidy, and repair any damaged pages. He loved his work, not because it paid much, it didn't, but because it gave him a quiet space where stories lived. Everyone in Seabrook agreed. Daniel was a kind man. He noticed small things. If Mrs. Miller's shopping bag tore in the market, he would carry it home for her. If old Mr. Jacob's fishing net broke, Daniel would help mend it, even though he didn't fish himself. On winter days, he would leave baskets of bread outside doors where he knew the families were struggling. He never left a note, but people guessed it was him. Children loved Daniel because he told the best Saturday reading hour stories. He had a gentle voice that made you feel safe, even when the story was full of pirates and storms. Often, his stories had heroes who weren't the strongest or fastest, but the ones who noticed the danger and acted anyway. And yet, Daniel didn't think of himself as a hero. He wasn't brave, he told himself. He wasn't strong. He just helped because it felt right. Seabrook had one very important building, the lighthouse. At night, its bright beam warned ships of the sharp rocks near the shore. But recently, the lighthouse had been under repair, its light dark and silent. Ships now relied on radio messages and the skill of their captains to find the harbor. Everyone hoped no big storm would come before the lighthouse was fixed. Daniel often walked home past the cliff where the lighthouse stood. He would look up at its dark glass and feel a strange unease. He didn't know it then, but before long, a night would come when that dark lighthouse would mean danger, and he would be the only one in the right place to act. Chapter 2. The Night the Storm Came. It began with a low growl in the sky. By late afternoon, the clouds over Seabrook had grown thick and dark, like heavy blankets. The air was cool and damp, and the wind made the sea unrestless. Fishermen hurried to pull their boats into the safety of the harbor. Daniel was still at the library when the rain started, light at first, then heavier, drumming on the roof. A small leak had appeared in the corner upstairs, and Daniel climbed a ladder to place a bucket under it. The building shook slightly when a strong gust of wind rattled the windows. By the time evening came, the storm was in full force. The wind howled like a living thing, pushing against the library door. Rain lashed sideways, making it hard to see outside. Waves crashed against the rocks beyond the harbor, sending white spray high into the air. Daniel decided to wait a little before walking home. He sat by the upstairs window, listening to the storm's wild song. That's when he noticed it, a faint flicker far out at sea. At first he thought it was lightning reflecting on the water, but then it came again, not in a flash, but in a slow, steady blink. It was a distress signal. Someone was out there, caught in the storm. Daniel's stomach tightened. He looked toward the cliff where the lighthouse should have been sending its bright warning, but it was still dark, silent, and useless. Without that light, any ship would find it hard to avoid the sharp rocks along the coast. He told himself someone else would see it. Maybe the harbor master, maybe the Coast Guard. But the storm was so loud, the rain so thick, that it was possible no one else had noticed. His eyes went to the corner of the library, where his old oil lantern sat. He had brought it from the city years ago, and it still burned brightly when lit. If he could take it to the highest point of the cliff, maybe, just maybe, the ship's crew would see it and change course. But the path to the cliff was dangerous, even in daylight. In this storm, with the wind pushing hard and the rocks slippery with rain, it would be worse. One wrong step, and he could fall. Daniel stood at the library door, lantern in one hand, coat wrapped tightly around him. His heart pounded. He wasn't sure if this was bravery or foolishness, but he opened the door and stepped out into the roaring night. Chapter 3. The Climb to the Cliff. The wind struck Daniel the moment he stepped outside. It pushed at him as if trying to send him back indoors. Rain slapped his face, cold and sharp, soaking his coat in seconds. He held the lantern close to his chest, protecting the small flame from the storm. The streets were almost empty. Everyone in Seabrook had gone inside, shutters closed, lights glowing faintly through windows. Only the roar of the ocean and the howl of the wind filled the night. The path to the cliff started at the edge of town. It was narrow, twisting upward between wild grass and slippery stones. In daylight, it was a peaceful walk with a beautiful view of the sea. But tonight, it was a dangerous climb. Daniel's boots sank into wet earth. The rain made the rocks slick, and twice he almost lost his footing. Each time he gripped the ground with one hand and kept the lantern safe with the other. The small flame flickered wildly, but it stayed alive. As he climbed, the sea below raged. Huge waves smashed against the rocks, sending white spray into the air. Somewhere out there, beyond the black water, was the ship, the one sending that weak, desperate signal. Halfway up the path, Daniel had to stop to catch his breath. The wind roared in his ears, and the cold bit into his fingers. He thought about turning back. No one had asked him to do this. It wasn't his responsibility. But then he imagined the people on that ship, maybe fishermen returning home, maybe families traveling to safety. He saw in his mind their faces, frightened, hoping for a light to guide them. Daniel took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the lantern, and kept climbing. When he finally reached the top, the lighthouse towered above him, silent, dark, and wet with rain. He couldn't light its great lamp, but he could use the edge of the cliff as a signal point. Daniel walked to the highest spot where the sea was clearly visible. He raised the lantern high and began swinging it slowly in a wide arc, over and over, sending a bright, moving light toward the open water. For a long moment, nothing happened. The storm raged, the sea churned, and the rain stung his skin. He was just one man with one small light against the vast darkness. Then, far away, the faint flicker from the ship changed. It blinked faster, almost like an answer. They had seen him. Chapter 4. A Signal in the Storm. Daniel's arms ached from holding the lantern high, but he didn't lower it. He kept swinging the light in a slow rhythm, side to side, side to side. Each movement was careful, steady, so the crew could see it through the storm. The wind screamed in his ears, but in his mind he imagined the captain of the ship looking through the rain, spotting the lantern, and shouting to his crew, "Turn the wheel, there's danger ahead." Minutes passed like hours. Daniel's clothes clung to his skin, heavy with water. His hair dripped into his eyes, and the cold was sinking deep into his bones. Still, he didn't stop. Then, through the darkness, he saw it. The ship's light had moved. It was no longer heading straight for the deadly rocks. Slowly, carefully, it was turning away. Daniel felt a rush of relief, but he also knew the storm wasn't over. The ship still had to reach the safety of the harbor, and that meant keeping the lantern visible until it was far from danger. Suddenly, a massive wave crashed against the base of the cliff, sending a spray of water so high it almost reached him. The ground trembled under his feet. He stepped back quickly, heart racing, but kept the lantern steady. Time blurred. The only things that existed were the lantern's glow, the dark shape of the ship, and the endless roar of the storm. Finally, after what felt like forever, the ship's light grew smaller, heading toward the calmer waters of the harbor. Daniel lowered the lantern, his arms shaking from exhaustion. His legs felt weak, but he managed to walk back toward the lighthouse wall and lean against it, breathing hard. Somewhere in the distance, over the howl of the wind, he thought he heard a faint sound, maybe the echo of a ship's horn, a long and grateful note in the night. Chapter 5. The Morning After. When Daniel woke the next morning, the storm had passed. The air was fresh, and the sea was calmer, though white foam still danced along the shore. His coat was still damp, and his arms ached, but the sun on his face felt warm and alive. As he walked into town, people were gathered in the market square, talking excitedly. He caught bits of their words. Storm, big ship, almost crashed, someone with a lantern. Then he saw it. The ship from the night before was docked in the harbor, its paint scratched from the waves, but still whole. Crew members were on the deck, speaking to townspeople, pointing up toward the cliffs. A fisherman named Harry spotted Daniel and waved him over. "There he is!" Harry shouted. Heads turned, and suddenly Daniel found himself surrounded. The ship's captain, a tall man with weathered skin, stepped forward. "You," the captain said, his voice deep. "It was you on the cliff, wasn't it, with the lantern?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. The captain's face softened. "You saved us. We were blinded by the rain, headed straight for the rocks. Your light, it gave us just enough time to turn." The crowd murmured with admiration. Daniel felt his cheeks grow warm. He hadn't done it for praise, but seeing the crew alive and safe filled him with quiet pride. Chapter 6. The Hero of Seabrook. 2 days later, the town held a small ceremony in the harbor square. The mayor stood on a wooden stage. The townspeople gathered around. The lighthouse repairs were finished, its bright beam once again sweeping across the sea. "Today," the mayor announced, "we honor someone who reminded us that bravery isn't about strength or fame. It's about seeing danger and choosing to act, even when it's hard." Daniel shifted uncomfortably as the mayor called his name. He stepped onto the stage, lantern in hand. The crowd clapped, some even cheering. Children waved, and the ship's crew stood at the front, smiling. The mayor handed Daniel a framed certificate that read, "For courage and service to the people of Seabrook." Beside it was a small silver medal engraved with the image of the lighthouse. Daniel spoke only a few words. "I didn't think about being brave. I just thought about the people who needed help. Anyone here would have done the same." But deep down, he knew not everyone would have faced that storm. And as he looked at the smiling faces around him, Daniel realized something. Seabrook was no longer just the town where he lived. It was his home. From that day forward, when the lighthouse's beam swept across the night sea, people in Seabrook often thought of another light, a small oil lantern held high in the storm by a man who never thought he was a hero until he became one. Thanks for watching. Take action today, not tomorrow. Press subscribe. And let's keep learning together. You're doing great. See you in the next one. Stay strong.